Yeah, perfect. Okay, so calendar tables. First, what is a calendar table? Okay, simple question. So it's basically a table which contains all the dates that are in your model. It should have one row per date and some elements relating to these dates in order for you to slice your data, such as month, year, quarter, and so on. Okay, so this is a calendar table. Why do you need a calendar table in Power BI, or we could even say in business intelligence? Well, the answer is obvious as well, right? It's to do time intelligence calculations, such as year-to-date, sales this year versus last year, these kind of things, right? So you need to have a proper calendar table in your model in order to use and do this kind of calculations, right? Rachel talked before we start about DAX, okay? So actually having a calendar table in your model allows you to use the DAX and the native time intelligence functions to perform your calculations, okay? So now the other question is how? How do I make a calendar table? Well, there are actually a few options available to you. The first one is probably using your backend, like a SQL query or probably an Excel file, which contains the relevant calendar table that you just pull in your Power BI desktop file and try to model the data. So that's the first option. The second option, I think the guy over here did a solution on this using DAX. Okay, so DAX stands for data analysis expression. It's basically a language in Power BI which allows you to do some measures and calculated columns, but also tables, right? So you can actually build some tables using the DAX language. And if you know this language pretty well, you can actually build a calendar table using DAX, okay? But that's not what we're gonna do today. Today, we're gonna use the third method, which is Power Query, okay? Who knows Power Query here? Who has never used it or who has never heard about Power Query? Okay, so I'm just gonna do a really brief introduction into Power Query before we dive into the code and the creation of this table. So Power Query is basically kind of the self-service ETL, extract, transform, and load of Power BI. So it basically allows you to connect to many different data sources, reshape it, clean it before you actually load it to your model, right? I love this tool. It's really user-friendly. You have a very good interface, which I can show you for those who don't know, where you have buttons and connectors and all that stuff. So let me just go to Power BI Desktop. The query editor is actually available here, okay? So I'm just gonna open it. So as you can see, you can connect to several different data sources, and then using the buttons, clean the data, reshape it, doing some merge, some transpose, some any kind of transformation that you want to do in your models, right? So the interface is here to help business users, right? But if you want to go further, if you want to do more advanced stuff, such as creating calendar tables on your own from scratch, you can use the M language. M stands for mashup engine. So it's basically the engine which allows Power Query to do all that mashup, okay? And you can actually use this language to do more advanced stuff, more complicated stuff, such as functions and creating tables and all that stuff. So what we're gonna do today is that I'm gonna show you how you can basically use the UI, the user interface and the buttons as a foundation, and then extend it and using a few tricks in M to create the table. Calendar tables will just be here as an example, as a showcase, okay? I'm more than happy to take any questions you would have about Power Query and M. And we could say that the objective of this workshop, I want you to leave this workshop saying, wow, but M is not complicated. This weird language that we see, that we're gonna see in a sec, is not complicated at all. I can build some stuff on my own, even though I'm not a developer, even though I'm just a business user, okay? So that's really the objective of today, all right? Everything's clear? No questions so far? Okay. So, go back to the slides. So there are actually, yeah, I love this one. Do you know you could do these kinds of things in PowerPoint? It's like nothing complicated. Like PowerPoint 2016, it's just a transition. I use it all the time. Okay, so before getting in, you need to understand the Power Query objects. Okay, so what I mean by objects is tables, rows, and more advanced stuff. So basically here, actually so this is a table, right, that is in Power Query. It has several columns and several rows. Basically, one column in a table is actually a list of values, right? And one row in your table is actually a record. Okay, so this is a list, and this is a record. How can you actually refer to these objects in Power Query and M? Well, pretty basic. To refer to a list, you can just type in the name of the table and then column name, okay? To refer to a record, name of the table and then row number. Keep in mind that in Power Query, everything starts from 0. So if you want to refer to the first element of the record, you're gonna have to put in 0, okay? So this is actually how you refer to the objects in Power Query. Now you're gonna ask yourself, why is it talking about lists and records? What's the point? Well, actually, my thinking is that if you understand how to refer to these objects, how useful they are, then you will do nearly everything in Power Query, okay? So we have a few examples in the PQ example file that you should all have on your computer right now. If you don't have it, it's not a real problem. You're gonna have it at the end of the session. So I'm just gonna go to the edit query. So let's see in action what I've just told you in the slides. So here I have a really basic table with year, category, and sales, okay? And as you can see here in this folder, I just extracted some values, some objects of this table. Nothing too complicated, right? So here, for example, I just typed in name of the table and then name of one of the column of the table, and I just got the list of the years which were in my sales table, right? Nothing too complicated. A record, the same. Sales, number of the row. So I actually get the first record, the first row of my table, which is actually a record, as we saw. This is how to refer to it. And as you can see, this record has 3 elements, which are basically the 3 columns of the table, right? Year, category, and sales, right? Question?
0 is not the header column.
No, 0 is the first row of the column.
Okay.
To get, that's an interesting question. To get the list of the columns in a table, I will show you just after how to do it, okay? But that's a good question. The 0 refers to the first element, the first record, the first row of your table. Yeah. Any other questions so far? So do you think it's complicated, this kind of stuff? Not really, right? So now the whole session is about using this and interacting with these objects in order to create custom stuff, such as a calendar table, okay? So, yeah, one thing I forgot to mention, if you go from here, you can actually embed a record and a list. So here, I am actually referring to the first, here, this is the first row, and then I'm just gonna grab the category of this first row, so I can really embed and make it together, the record and the list, in order to really dig into the data and get a precise value within my table, okay? Any questions? No? Okay, great. So now, these were about lists and records. There is another thing that you actually need to understand as well. Functions. Who knows about functions in Power Query? Who has already created custom functions built by yourself? Okay, only a few of you? Okay, great. So I'm just gonna show you the basics and then again, we'll do some demos. So actually there are, if I want to make it simple, there are two types of functions in Power Query. The first type is called native functions. So these are the functions that you can refer to using the hashtag, okay, such as dates and duration, okay? Well, actually, to get the list of all the functions which are available in Power Query, first you can Google, okay? Most of my clients really forget it a lot. They ask me some questions, I just tell them, why don't you Google? It's you have the answer right now, okay? But anyway, but you can actually have it within your Power Query environment, which is really convenient. You can actually get the library of all the Power Query functions, which is really, really useful and really convenient. Why? Because the M language doesn't have IntelliSense. What is IntelliSense? Is kind of a syntax helper that you have when you write DAX code, but you don't have it when you use M. I just attended this Seattle Summit, the Business Application Summit, a few days ago. The product team told us that M IntelliSense, so the fact that you will be helped by the syntax using M, will be released within 3 months. Okay, so it's going to be even easier to do M within Power Query, within the Power Query editor. Okay, but from now, what you can do is simply use these shared in a blank query to get all the lists of the functions in Power Query. So let's do it. As you can see here in the Power Query example, I just have a query over here, which is called Power Query Functions. How did I actually create this query? Really simple. Right-click, new query, blank query. Equal jazz, jazz is in French, hashtag shared. And there we go. We have the list of all the objects which are within Power Query, so all the other queries, plus all the functions available in Power Query. Pretty useful, right? Who knew this tip? No one. Okay. So I'm happy to see this. You know why? Because I talked to Miguel Lopez, who is actually the product manager of Power Query. So he's basically the guy who is building the UI and building everything that you see now. I told him that this feature shared was hidden. They should just put it somewhere in a button, which is not the case, so that the users know what are the functions that you use in their report and in their queries, right? Yes. Questions?
I see there's like over 800 different functions in here.
Yes.
Can you drill down to each one to get a description of what each function, how each function works, or no?
Do you think so?
I hope so.
So that's actually the next part of the demo. I'm just gonna get back to it. And another question?
I was just gonna ask you.
Okay. Yeah, of course. So actually, this is the list, right? And as you can see here, so this was a list, this was a record. The output here of these functions are a record as well, okay? So this is basically a record of all the functions. You can actually switch between the objects I've presented to you. So here, this record, I can actually convert it into a table, right? So you can do it with me, into table. So as you can see here, anytime I perform a step or a button or anything in Power Query, it creates a step where I can see how my query looks like at each step. At any time, I can just delete, rename all the steps of my queries, okay? So here, basically, I have the list of all my functions. And for example, if I want to have, let's say this one, github.contents, just can click here and I have the syntax. Okay, bad example. We're just gonna get into list functions. Let's choose one, list.combine. And there we go. So don't click on the function itself. Okay, just click on this area over here. And you actually get the syntax and an example of how you can actually use the function within your query. Pretty useful, right? It is built in within the query editor. So as you can see here, by transforming the records into a table, I can just simply create kind of a Google search. I can type in any functions and then just get the result, right? Any questions?
Question?
Yes.
If you were doing a search right now, it would search on just the names of the functions.
Yes.
Is there any way to search within the actual
Description?
comments or description?
That's actually a good question. Not sure. No, I don't think so. Not that I know. Maybe someone knows in the room, but I'm not sure. Okay. So now you get a more precise idea of what are the native functions of Power Query. So we saw the lists, the records. We saw the fact that you can actually switch from a record into a table. You can do the same for a list. You can convert a list into a table. Okay. Now you have to know a little bit more about personalized functions. So personalized functions are actually functions that you can build yourself using the M language. You can actually leverage the native functions to build your custom functions, right? So here, we're gonna do it together. I've created a really simple M code. I'm sure you all get it. It takes two parameters, X and Y, which are numbers. Here is the output of the function. So the output of my function is gonna be a number as well, but it could be a table or list, okay? All the objects in Power Query. And then this is my query. I'm sure you already figure out the element, let and in. So this is the step. Addition, I'm just gonna grab the two numbers and add them. Here is my output, okay? So this is basically a very, very simple function that you can define on your own using the M language. So you have an example here. I think I have it here on the PQ example file. So you can actually see that it is a function because it has this symbol, okay? So if I go on the Home tab to the Advanced Editor, you can actually see the code, which I've just shown you in PowerPoint. Okay, how did I build this? Well, really simple. Right-click, blank query. Okay, from here, when I'm typing in a function, I prefer going back to the Advanced Editor. So I'm going there. Okay, so this is gonna be the function I'm gonna build. And before the let instruction, I'm just gonna put my parameters. Okay, so we had said X as number, Y as number. Okay, so these are the parameters my function is gonna take to retrieve the output. And then we can call it whatever you want. Portland is fun. So this is actually the name of the step. X plus Y plus 2, you could say whatever. Okay, something interesting here. The M language is case sensitive. So be careful what you type in, right? Here, if I put Portland is fun without the F in capital letter, it's not gonna work.
Are you missing the result being a number?
Sorry? What did you say?
It's not.
Yeah, you said that the output, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So actually, let me just correct this. So these are actually optional, right? And this one is actually optional, but that's a good practice. That's the best practice to also mention the output, the type of the output the function is going to retrieve, right? So here as number as well, okay? So these are the types of the parameters your function is going to take, and this is the type of the object which is going to be returned by your function. Okay? So this function is really basic, right? We're just going to use it here. Because it uses a parameter, it's actually a function. So I can say 3, 5. So the output should be 10 because I've added 2. So I can invoke the function. And actually here, you see that the name of the function, which was query2, we could actually rename it add, we could just name it adder. Okay, so this is actually the name of the function we've just created. And now here, I can invoke my function in any of my queries, right? So here I've just created a blank query, which invokes the function. But you can imagine what you can do, because you can actually invoke this custom function in any of the queries that you have built in Power Query, right? So think about it. You're going to be able to do crazy stuff because you build something on your own and then you can call it, you can invoke it anywhere in your M code, right? So now that you know all this stuff, we're going to use these lists, records, functions, tables to create a calendar table. We're going to actually create a function which creates calendar table on the fly, on demand. Okay? My user wants a calendar table which starts this date and this date. So if you think about it, these will be parameters of my function. So I'm going to actually create the function which computes the calendar table and pass the parameters so it's generic, so I can reuse it. Okay, because that's the aim of a function, right? Is to reuse it. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, can you say a lot of examples of functions that you might create? You know, like the calendar is kind of an obvious one. What else
Yeah.
have you found that's been like really helpful to do a custom version?
Okay, so let me repeat the question for the live. So the question is actually, what are the use cases behind the functions? Are there any common scenarios where you build your own functions using M? The answer is definitely yes. I have one good example in mind, which is really convenient, is when you want to append the content of several files, several CSV files or several Excel files in a folder, which could be a local folder or a SharePoint folder. There is actually a native way to do it in Power Query, but it is somehow a bit confusing what is done natively by the UI. It actually manipulates these objects, records, functions, and all that stuff, but it's a bit confusing for the end user, right? So what I prefer to do instead is to connect to the table, turn it into a function, and then using this function to append dynamically all the files which are in my folder. I have a video on this on my YouTube channel, so you can see it. It's not what we're going to cover today, but I'm more than happy to show you the answer at the end of the session, or to send you the link to the video which shows you how you can actually do this. Okay? But normally, if I do my job today, you should be able to do it on your own tomorrow, right? Because you will be able to use the functions for any of your business use cases. That's the idea, right? Here we are just using the calendar tables as an example, but the idea behind is that you can use the functions for any other business use cases, right? Yes?
Can you share your functions through your organization?
So that's a good question. Can you actually share a function, like make it available to the organization? The answer is Not exactly. What I mean is that you cannot make it available on the ribbon or make it completely generic. You will actually have to copy and paste the code. But what you can actually do as a workaround is to save your PBIX as a PBIT. Who knows this format, PBIT? Yeah. So PBIT is actually a format which basically allows you to save your Power Query file not as a pure Power Query file, but as a template. So it doesn't hold the data, but it holds all the metadata, which means all your queries and all the potential functions that you could create. And you can then send the template to other people. And with this scenario, you can kind of make the functions available to many users. Okay? Again, we're not going to cover this today, but that would be the answer to the question. PBIT, Power BI templates.
Or you could create a custom web service. Power BI calls.
Yes, but it is not pure Power BI related, right? But that's true. Yeah, you can actually create a service on the web and then refer to, yeah, yes. Okay, yeah, another question?
About a functional, cool use of a function was to find the most recent Excel file and use that as a cool one.
Okay, so that's a cool one that you used. Yeah, so another example, to retrieve the last date of one particular file in the folder. Yeah, why not? There are tons of use cases behind functions, right? You can actually use functions also to call APIs on the web, for example, to retrieve the distance between 2 points, for example. Okay, so now calendar tables. So we're gonna use all that stuff that we talked about. We're gonna do it actually from scratch. I want everyone to build this table with me today, okay? I don't want everyone to be lost. So if you have any problems, just raise your hands. You have helpers at the back. I can also help you if you want to. But normally, I'm not gonna go too quick. If it is the case, just raise your hand, okay? So you can just open a blank Power Query file. Okay, so we can start from scratch. We're gonna actually go to the edit queries. So we can be within Power Query. We're gonna use the shared functions so we can have these built-in library. So I'm gonna go to blank query, right click, equal shared, oopsie, sorry. Turning it into a table. You can rename your query. So this is going to be my M functions. Okay, great. So the function I want to use for this use case is list.dates. So what does it do? Just gonna filter over this function, list.dates. So as you can see here, this function takes 3 arguments and it's gonna return a list. So the first argument is a start date, which has to be a date, obviously. The second argument is a number. The third argument is the step, which is actually a duration. So it could be minutes, seconds, hours, or days. We're gonna actually build a daily calendar table, okay? So let me just show you these durations. We can just create a blank query over here. And we're just gonna say equal hashtag duration. And we're gonna type in 1 day, comma, 0, 0, 0. So these actually refer to day, hour, minute, I'm missing a color, and second. just to show the output. So this actually returns a value, which is a duration with 1 day and 1 full day, okay? So now you can imagine what we're gonna do. We're gonna use this argument as the third argument of our list.dates functions. So the step of the table is daily, okay? We're gonna add 1 day to each of the dates of the table, right? So you can just remove this. It was just to show you the output, or you can create another one, new query, blank query. So let's go. Equal list dot dates. Be careful, M is case sensitive. Okay. So the first argument is a date. And here you can see that not having IntelliSense is a bit a burden, right? We don't have this helper which tells us, okay, you can use this. Here is the syntax. It's gonna come. It's gonna come within 3 months. This is called IntelliSense. It's gonna come within the query editor, so you can build even easier functions. Okay. So here the first argument is a date, so I can use the built-in functions date. So we're gonna start from, let's say, 2017, 1st of January. Okay, I can put any space between my arguments. Okay, doesn't matter. So remember that was the first argument of the function, the start date. The second argument is gonna be the steps. So let's say we're gonna create 12 days. So we're gonna say 12, and then the third argument is actually the duration, 1, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so you should all have something like this. If you have a problem, just raise your hand. Everything is fine. So we can just say enter. And there we go. With a few clicks, a few functions, you get a list of consecutive dates, right? You can actually see here that the output is a list. Okay, so this is a list. We're gonna actually rename this calendar because this is gonna be the foundation of my table. Yeah, just coming. So let me get back to the, yeah, you have it on the screen.
Last parentheses.
Because you missed, you added 1 comma more. Yes?
Are you showing the European format of dates or the American format of dates?
You're gonna anticipate all my demos, right? Yeah, I'm gonna get back to it. Yeah, that's a good comment. You can actually interact with the culture of your computer within Power Query. I'm gonna get back to it. That's an interesting question. Yes?
Can you make the file bar bigger?
Yes.
It's very hard to see that.
Sorry. So is that complicated? No. List.dates, which is actually available from the shared query. One argument, a date. Second argument, a step. Third argument, a duration. Okay? So nothing too complicated. Yes?
Changing your format to the needing 0 or not needing 0?
Yes. So this is actually because I'm French and I have a French culture within my computer. We're gonna actually see later on how you can actually change the culture. You can actually interact with the culture of your computer within Power Query. Okay, so let's just keep going. So this is actually a list. Okay, remember what we've said about the objects? List, records. So this could be the foundation of a table, right? Because tables have columns, and we saw earlier that columns are actually lists, okay? So this list, I'm gonna actually transform it here into a table. And here you see that there is something really interesting. You can actually start by typing your code and then get back to the UI. Okay, so we created the first step using a function that we built on our own. And then second step, I'm using the built-in UI, right? So you can keep going between what you want to do custom and what is available natively in Power Query. This is awesome, no? So here, I'm just gonna actually switch this list into a table, because remember what is the objective is to have a proper calendar table. So here, we're gonna see this later on, we can just select the native options. So I'm just gonna say, okay. And there we go. We have two steps available at the right side. The first one was the source, which was actually the list.dates that we've done together. And this is actually the output of the list converted into a table using the UI, right? So as I said, you can at any time delete your step, don't do it, modify it, rename it. One cool thing that I like about renaming, so if we go back to the advanced editor, so just a comment here, when a step has spaces on his name, which is the case here, converted to table, so the name of the step has spaces, it actually creates these little annoying things over here. It actually helps the interpreter of Power Query understand that it is an object, okay? So one of the best practice in Power Query is to rename a step without spaces, okay? So here we could say rename, so right click on the step, rename, convert to table.
So why do you have no spaces?
Sorry?
Why do you use an underline in between words?
Because as we've just seen, if the name of the step has spaces, it makes the code heavier to read, because it creates this little annoying hashtag on each step which doesn't have any spaces.
Annoying for the software to read or for us?
Annoying for us. The software, we don't mind, for us. Okay, so this is one of the best practices, to use a name without a space. So now if I go back to the query editor, here you can see it's much easier to read, I think.
So why is it easier to read? I'm not understanding what the problem is.
So can someone answer maybe?
Wrap with quotes and has extra counts.
So basically your eye sees the underlines and just instantly knows that we have Word and it's not code.
Exactly.
Got it.
So
Well, if you want to skip your steps with spaces, then you can do it.
I just wanted to understand.
Yeah.
If you have 10 different steps and you're in that table, you'll put those quotations.
Exactly.
And if I need to
Oh,
go
the
and modify
quotations
it,
are gone and the pound's gone.
That's the point.
and if I need to change that and modify it to make it never query, this is a lot easier to do than finding all those quotations. And if I miss a quotation,
Yeah,
and if I put a space, it won't work.
yeah.
Great one.
Zeros.
If you think of a default,
So by default, it creates a name of a step, which has to make sense for the editor. So it has spaces. So you have to actually rename it. Yeah. So let's keep going. You can actually let me show you another attribute of the steps, which are pretty useful as well. Is here you can go to the properties of any steps, and you can actually add some custom comments to your steps, so that it helps you understand what you've done, what was the business logic behind it, why you did this particular choice. Okay, so let's just say test, because here it's nothing complicated. So I'm just putting test here in the description of my second step. And when I hover my mouse over here, I can actually see the description of my step. And if I go back to the advanced see it, sorry, here before the step, I actually see the comment, the description of the step. Pretty useful as well. When you have many steps, you go back to your Core Editor 3 months after having built your PBIX, and then you, wow, I have 15 steps. What did I do here? Okay, really useful. Yes.
Can you comment things out past the end of a line of code, or is it better to do it?
Yes, good question. I think that you can use this thing like, I don't know, let's try this. Maybe, no. I know you can do it. Sorry? yeah, but yeah, you can do it using the below steps here, below thread. Okay. So now we have a table. So we almost won, right? Now it's going to be super easy. Okay, I can do anything I want. So let's rename this dates. I can put it into a date format. Okay, over here, I can actually pick up the format of my dates. Okay, so this is going to be a date. Okay. Is everyone okay? Yes, okay. So date. So now we can add more information about these dates, as I said in the introduction. Some elements that we could use in the report in order to slice the data, such as day, month, quarter, year. You can actually do this with the UI. If you go to the add column over here, so we start from here, the dates, and I'm going to say, okay, please add, let's say, the day. Okay, so add column, you click on the column first, add column, date, and then you can pick up anything that you want. So these are built-in calculations within the UI, which helps you get dates information, basically. Is everyone okay? So we're gonna add actually a day. Go back to the dates. You have to click on the dates anytime you want to add a column. So first click on the dates column because the UI needs to start from a date, right? So to add the column, it needs to actually start from the date. Okay? So this is the date column. Sorry?
It's referencing off that.
Exactly. So here, date, we're gonna add, let's add the day name. No, we're gonna do it after. Let's add the quarter of the year. And then we can probably add the month number, the month's name, and let's add a year. Okay, great. So now we have this little table. You may not have exactly chosen the same things that me. It doesn't matter, okay? Just attributes of the dates, okay? So here I have day, quarter, month name, and year. As you may have noticed, my months are in French. Janvier, which is January. Yeah, easy. So how can I actually modify this without doing any settings on my computer? Right, I can do it using M. So let me show you this. So here, when I added the month name, it actually created, for those who don't see this bar over here, you just need to turn it on, sorry. Okay, in order to see this. Okay, for those who don't see the bar at the top, you need to turn it on. Maybe I should have told you before, right? So this is really convenient because you can actually see the code, which is written, by the UI, by Power Query, when you actually use the buttons in Power Query, right? So this language is called the M language, as you got it. and you can actually modify any steps. So you can start from the UI and then just edit it. So here what I'm gonna do, so let's just type in, you don't do it, I'm just gonna show you. So date dot month name. Okay, so I can have the library like this as well. I can focus on a particular function. And as you can see here, there is an optional argument, which is the culture. Okay, so here, as you can see, I have an example, and it switches the culture in US, English US, right? No matter what is the culture of the computer. Okay, so here, what we're gonna do, when I've done the inserted month name, I can just edit it and say this. I've just added the comma and the culture between, how do we say this in English? Quotes? Yeah, quotes. Okay, so I've actually edited a step which was built by the UI, okay, built by the button I've used to add the comment. Okay, so you see how flexible it is. So here, if I hit enter, it should work. Yes, there we go. I have my month in English now. So to get back to the comment that was done about the name of the steps, this guy over there, what's your name?
Joe.
Joe mentioned something interesting. He said, yeah, when you have many steps and the steps doesn't have spaces in the name, it actually refers to the last step and it's not easy to read. It's definitely true. If you go to the advanced editor, as you can see, here are the native steps name, which were given by the UI. And M is actually a language which always refer to the step before. Okay, so this one actually refers to this one actually refers to this one. You see? So by editing the name of your steps, you're making the code way more easier to understand, right? So that's what we're gonna do here. We can actually rename all these steps without spaces. So here we can say rename date. You can say type. You can put whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Just don't put spaces if you want to have a light code. Name. And now look how easier it is to read. Right? Short names without spaces makes the code easier to understand, easier to maintain, easier to modify as well. Great. So we have a subset of a calendar table, but I can edit any of these things over here. I could say 120 and go back to my steps, and there we go. I have my table, right? It's completely dynamic. Okay, you can edit any of these things. And that's what we're gonna do next. Now we have a query, right? We have a table, yes, sir. We have a table which returns a calendar built on our own. Now I want to turn it into a function, into a custom function, which will take arguments such as start and end date. Okay, so these arguments will come from the user. The user will be able to choose the dates, and then the function will actually retrieve the correct result of this output, this table we've built together. Okay, so I'm actually gonna use the first step. I want to make it a little bit more generic using functions and parameters, as we've seen before in the PowerPoint. Okay, there was a question?
I think you're probably the answer.
Okay, so now what we're gonna do is actually we can go to the advanced editor, okay, of this calendar table, and we're gonna actually transform this table into a function, and this function will actually have a table as a result, the calendar table. Okay? So do you remember how we turn this into a function? Just gonna put before the let the argument. Nothing too complicated, we saw it before. So the first argument I wanna use here is a start date. Be careful, M is case sensitive. Date. Let's say end date. Date. Okay. And then the output of my function will be a table, as we saw. So here, that was actually the code we built on our own using both the editor and the UI. And what we are currently doing is transforming this table into a function. Is that clear for everyone? Yeah? So here what I'm just going to do is I'm going to use the parameters of my functions within my code in order to make it dynamic. So now the question is, where is the step, or maybe where are the steps, maybe not, which need to be edited, which need to be dynamic? The source. Any other suggestions? Yeah, you're right. Normally, if I update my source, if I make it dynamic, because everything refers to the source, okay? It's a step language, then everything will be updated. Yeah? So let's do it. We're gonna actually replace the first argument by this. Okay? So here you can just highlight this one and say start date. Be careful, and it's case sensitive. So what I've just done here is that I replaced the manual date by the parameter of the function. Is everyone okay? Yes? Okay. So now we have a bit of a problem. Not a problem, but we need to do something else. The second argument is actually a number. And what is actually this number? Yeah, it's actually the number of days between my start date and my end date. So think about it. You are creating a function. So you want the user experience to be good, right? You're not going to ask your users to enter a date and then a number of days. It doesn't make sense, right? You need to provide them a way to enter a start date and an end date, and you're going to do the workout for them, right? So that's what we are doing here. We say that the inputs, the parameters, will be starts and end dates. So we're going to use the M language to actually compute the number of days between the start and the end date, and then we will use this result to put it into the source step, right? Is that clear? So nothing too complicated. So do it. It's gonna return an error. It's normal, but doesn't matter. Just click on done. So you will have an error. It's okay. It's completely normal. So let's just see something. You can type in here duration.days. Be careful, M is case sensitive. I repeat it over and over because we always forget it. Duration.days. So duration.days actually takes a duration as an argument and retrieve the output as a value, okay? So what you actually have to know is that if I say, so let's try this. Don't do it, I'm just gonna try it. But what I'm just trying here is to see what will be the output of this. Okay, so what is the output of the difference between two dates? So here I'm using the 12th of January 2017 minus the 1st January of 2017. Perfect. It is a duration. So it is actually the output that the duration.days function is going to take to retrieve the 11. Okay? So that's perfect. I can just go here and say duration.days, and then I have my answer. So you see how I think using Power Query. I need something, I'm going to the library, I'm trying to see what is the output, what is the type, how can I actually use the functions, and then I'm going to use all that stuff in my first function, right? So here, go back to the calendar, which is an arrow, advanced editor. And what we're going to do here is that we're going to actually create a step, which will be the duration, or we can call it number days. So this is actually a step which is going to store the result of the number of days between the two dates, okay? And this will be really easily duration dot days end date minus start date. And you have to do a +1 because you want to have the last date in your calendar, right? So it has to do a +1, okay? So this is what I've done here. I went to the calendar function. I've just added this little step over here. So this step basically counts the number of days between the two parameters of the function, exactly what we need over here. So I've just realized that I should have put it before. So we can do Ctrl+X and put it before the source. Okay, because it has to be known before you actually make the computation, right? You're gonna use this number of days before before the source, yeah. Okay? So keep in mind something interesting. Except from the last one, any steps has to end with a comma. Okay, so just add a comma over here. Any steps in your query editor, they have to end with a comma. Okay, comma, 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 just to indicate that the flow is going. And this one is missing. Why? Because it is actually the last step. Okay? So here we have created the first step, so it needs a comma. Okay, great. So now what shall I do next? Now that I've stored somewhere the result, the number of days between my end date and start date, what should I do?
Change that 120 to be number of days.
Exactly. There we go. I can just say number of days. So what is the...
I think you're missing the equal greater than. Is that like a lambda function at the top after the word as table?
Sorry, what did you say? Sorry?
On the first line.
Yeah.
After as table, you need the equal greater than. And what is that?
Let me
The end of that line.
let me check this.
No, at the end of your first line.
After
Yeah.
as table.
After table.
After table.
As table equal greater than.
Sorry, I don't get it.
Go to the first line.
Yeah,
Go to the first line at the very end. No, the top line.
yeah.
After the as.
Oh,
table.
yeah, you're right. You're right. Sorry.
What is that called?
So here it's just to say pass these parameters to the function. Yeah, you're right. I forgot to put this. Yeah. So this actually says the parameters that you have mentioned over there, pass them into the function. Okay. There is actually another syntax with which embeds the let and in, which I barely really not use so much. This one is much clearer to me. So it's basically the parameters, the output, and then the arrows to say pass the parameters to the function. Okay? And there we go. We're good to go. So we have our function with the parameters. These parameters are used over here in the steps to make the correct computation. Done. And as you can see, which used to be a table is now a function because it has parameters, right? And the thing is, I can now use this function to create my calendar table. So let's say I'm gonna name this get calendar. So this is actually the name of the function. Yes?
I missed, why you put the test in there.
Okay. So the question is about this one?
Yeah.
So this one was actually when I showed the fact that you could put some descriptions in some steps. This description is actually, you give a business meaning to what you've done during the step, and it's gonna be referred here before the actual step that you've named. So it's not a step, it has no impact on the code, it's just basically a comment.
Okay.
Okay? I could have done it for any of the steps.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just to showcase the descriptions. So now I have my function and I can use it. So let's say start date. I'm gonna put a date over here. Let's say 1st of, no, this one, yeah. And then an end date. Invoke, and there we go. We have our dynamic user-driven table. Okay? So is that really difficult? No? Not really, right? You do it once or twice and then you're done. Well, actually, you do it once and you just have to paste your code. Okay? You just have to paste your function over here. Oopsie, sorry, not this one. And just copy the code, paste it anywhere, or put it in a template. Okay? And then you can use it anywhere. This is a function. So anything that can read Power Query code, so it could use it in Excel, right? Did you know that there is Power BI within Excel? Yeah? No? Power Query is actually within Excel, right? So you could actually use this code within the Power Query editor of Excel and create a dynamic user-driven table, calendar table, using this code as well, right? So now just a last thing, just to show you how you can make it dynamic. Actually, what you could do is just saying, okay, I have these built-in parameters, but I know this function, so which is called datetime dot date. Let me remind me this, datetime dot local now. So this function actually returns the date of today, right? So if I want to make my table even more dynamic, I'm just gonna ask the user, what do you want to have as a start date? And then everything I will do it on my own. I'm gonna assume that I wanna make the calendar table as dynamic as the days flow. Okay, so if I'm on the 26th of July, then my calendar table will stop on the 26th of July. And then anytime I refresh the data, it's gonna update this date, and it's gonna then enlarge, because it's dynamic, it is a function, it's gonna enlarge my table, okay? So here, what I could actually do is to say, okay, when I invoke my function here, so this is actually the output, let's say we call it T, and I can actually invoke here T, okay? And it's gonna create a table which stops, so one row per date, and it stops at today. And you could actually do even more sophisticated is that you could just say, okay, so this is the start date, and I can just remove this argument. Okay? So you could just remove this argument because you want to make it dynamic and from today, as of today. And here, what you could do is just say T.
Other way around.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. Yeah.
Is there a possibility of making it an optional parameter?
Yes. So let me just show you this. Great. So now my get calendar only has one parameter, which is the start date, and then I do everything on my own using the datetime.local now. Okay. So what is the question?
Optional parameter. So we can pass it if it is there, otherwise we use.
Yes. So the question is, can we actually pass some optional parameters? The answer is definitely yes. I think that if you don't mention the type over here, then it becomes optional. Okay?
Wouldn't you have issues if you pass a different L function? Your duration that phase takes a date.
Yeah.
So why would you want to make it optional if you?
No, in this case, I would not be, no, it was just to showcase how you can make parameters options. But in this case, you have to put it as a date. Yeah, it's definitely, yeah. Yeah.
Anywhere that it's not a number. I mean, your syntax or your data type.
Yes.
And your functions are going to determine what your parameters are.
Yes.
So if you have a data type that it's going to go into, you're going to want to make it non-optional.
Of course.
It's going to fail if it doesn't. Right?
Of course. This is why in 90% of the time, I always force the data type of my parameters in my function. Because I want to make sure that this input will be used properly across the code, right? Okay. I think, I don't know if we have time or maybe we can have...
Okay. Yeah, so we have up till 5:58. When the next session starts at 5:45, there's a mingling kind of time.
Yeah, okay.
5:45.
So we still have like 10 minutes for questions? Okay, great. So just before taking the questions, just if we summarize what we have done. So we got the point of understanding the Power Query objects, lists, queries, tables, how you can switch between each of these objects, okay? We also saw how you can actually start from a query, turn it into a function, how to build your custom functions, okay? And then this example was really about, okay, we have a list, we turn it into a table, and then we create a function, so it's fully generic, it's fully dynamic, and so I can fully interact with it and use it basically anywhere in any tools which reads M or Power Query code, right? So there are hundreds of examples where you could use functions. There is this append, there is these dates of the last file in the folder. I'm sure that now that you have seen this, you have many, many scenarios in mind, many things that you would like to make customizable but reusable. And functions will be definitely your best friend, okay? And trust me, if you understand how to use lists, records, functions, if you're a bit curious, if you go to check the library, ask some questions on the forum, watch some videos, you can build crazy things in Power Query and M without being a developer. It's true. I mean, I'm sure that tomorrow you'll be able to do it again, right? So yeah, that's what we saw today. I'm more than happy to have a few questions if there are. Yes.
So if you do this technique in DAX, you can set the start date and end date to be based upon your data, so you don't have kind of empty dates
Yes.
showing up and drop downs and lists. Is there a way to do that in Power Query or M?
So the question is, in DAX, you can actually, so everyone knows DAX. What does DAX stand for? Yeah, so I talked about it briefly during the introduction. So DAX is basically a language which is not this one. This one is M, it's Power Query. It's when you clean the data, it's when you prepare it in Power Query. DAX comes after. It's once you have loaded the query, you want to answer business questions, create some ratios and stuff. There we go, we have DAX. But you can also use DAX to create some tables, as we said. And the question is, when you do it in DAX, you can actually retrieve some dynamic dates of other tables, of fact tables where the data is stored, to actually get dynamically the dates of start and end, right? Like a min or max date of this stuff. So that's an interesting question. And you have the answer. From what I've shown you today, you know how you could do it in M and in Power Query. So let me give you a hint. How would you retrieve the maximum date of another table in Power Query? Another hint. The date is in a column, right? Can you actually reach a column of a particular query within Power Query? Yes?
Tables, column, max.
So let's do it. See here, let's do it on the example one because I have a proper table. Okay. So this is not a date, but it's going to be the same mindset, right? I want to have the minimum and the maximum of this particular column, right? Yeah, I can just do it. Let's say, well, by the way, I think I have it here. List from sales. There we go. So here I can reach a particular column of any queries in my editor. And then I could just say list.max. Okay? So here it stores the result, the output, which is basically a scalar value. In your scenario, it would be a date, a max date, and then you can use this output in your function. Okay, so that's a good example because you see in action that if you understand what is a record, what is a list, and how can I access to it, then I can build really custom things, right? Just using what I've shown you today, records, list, functions, just this. Yeah.
Are there other common business use cases for using M over SQL? We've talked about integrating with Excel, working with flat files. Any other things come to mind?
So the question is, if I understand well the question, what are the scenarios where you would probably use more M or Power Query than SQL? That's the answer, right? That's the question, right? So the answer is when you are working with flat files and when you want to do cleansing on the fly within Power Query, if you have ease with Power Query, then you should definitely go for it. There are many people who don't know anything about SQL. So when there is this case, well, they have no choice, right? They just do the cleansing in M and in Power Query. When there are actually some sources from which you can actually clean the data in SQL, such as SQL Server or Oracle, then there is a real question. Should I do it in M? Should I do it in SQL? There is actually this thing which is called query folding. Have you heard about this? No? So basically query folding is you're doing your M code. So let's say you're retrieving data from a SQL Server database, right? You don't know anything about SQL, so you won't do your cleansing in M and in Power Query, so you're just gonna reshape the data using Power Query in M. Basically, the mashup engine is smart because it knows how to translate the M code into a SQL code and sends it back to the source so that the code doesn't execute locally, but on the server where the data is, right? So this is called query folding, right? So I cannot cover this now, but just have a look at it, query folding, because it will help you make some kind of arbitrage between should I do it in M or in SQL, because not every M code and not every M transformation has a SQL equivalent. And there might be some scenarios where you do the cleansing in M, but there isn't the possibility to translate it into a SQL statement. So the query faults, and it's going to import all the data locally, and then you might have some performance issues, right? And in this scenario, you would probably do it in SQL, or you would probably need to think differently on how you would reshape your data. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
That's it.
Thanks. So maybe another one, and then we'll just have some drinks and fun. Not saying that here we're not having fun, huh? Obviously. No? Okay, so thank you very much, and see you there.